A new documentary about the explosive Panorama interview with Princess Diana in 1995 includes claims she was tricked into taking part with the help of faked bank statements.
Well, the BBC says it will now carry out an independent investigation, but claims the documents did not influence the princess's decision to speak on camera.
Well, in the ITV documentary, which concludes tonight, former BBC graphic designer Matt Weisler talks about being approached by journalist Martin Bashir. Well, Matt Weisler, sorry for mispronouncing your name earlier, joins us now. This is a big story. You know, I was editing the Daily Mirror when all this was, well, first of all, News of the World, then the Daily Mirror, actually, through this period. And, if a tabloid newspaper had done what the BBC and Martin Bashir are alleged to have done, there would have been absolute pandemonium driven by the BBC, who would have been outraged at such behaviour. There is an irony here in the way that they've been behaving, but the consequences of what happened with this interview were gigantic, leading within 2 years to the Princess of Wales dying in an underpass with no royal protection. So a serious, serious story. You are right in the middle of all this. Are you surprised it's taken this long for the truth to come out?
Absolutely. At the time, shortly after I did the interview with the Mail on Sunday, I couldn't believe that nothing had come of it. And I was speaking to the reporter who'd written the story, and neither of us could understand it at all. And you know, I was quite aware of the fact that something had happened, and I was no longer a person that you could go to for design services. So I soon changed my life and moved away and abandoned television, and therefore buried the whole matter.
Your whole career was basically wrecked because a BBC journalist asked you to fake documents so that he could effectively ensnare the Princess of Wales by playing to her paranoia, by producing fake evidence that her paranoia was based on reality. He continues to work at the BBC. He's one of their top religious affairs correspondents now. You never worked for the BBC again.
As I'd left the BBC shortly before I mocked up those bank statements, you know, I was running a private production company, and I was doing a bit of work for the BBC. But when I, for instance, did the Review of the Year programme, the producer did point out to me that although they loved the pitch we did to them and the concepts for that programme, they were told they shouldn't work with us. And that was the first time I noticed that there was a decree out there that said I couldn't work for the BBC any longer. And after that, I also met graphic designers in the street. The whole design department knew me, cameramen knew me, and a lot of people mentioned that...
So you became a sort of persona non grata in the industry.
I did.
But Matt Weisler, can you just explain for those people watching what it was you were asked to do and what part that played, do you think, in securing the interview?
On the evening when I produced the two bank statements, Martin sat with me, and I'd worked with him on many, many programmes. I thought he was utterly professional and very, very good at his job. And he sat with me and said, look, I really, really need two bank statements that I've seen that show that someone, it had to do with surveillance, is what he said. It was all about surveillance, people being paid for keeping an eye on someone. But he never mentioned names, and he had a notebook with him, and he kept all his information to himself, and he briefed me verbally, and I asked him to sketch out what he was actually wanting, and he wouldn't put pen to paper. He insisted that I did all the work of creating it, and I established which bank it was that these statements were supposed to come from, and I found some bank statements through a friend, and I got them that night. And by the time he'd ended, the briefing had ended, I had written it all out and sketched it out, and he sort of was happy with all the figures that were involved, and he left, and I spent the rest of the night desperately trying to put it all together on a very small home desk computer, not my sort of professional machinery that I've been using for years.
And how do you feel that those documents were part of an apparent plot to basically con the Princess of Wales into doing this interview by validating her paranoia, and that the interview set off a chain of events that, as I say, led within 2 years to her death?
In a strange kind of way, it made me feel guilty that I was so dedicated to doing a job and that I just didn't pick up any signals that there was anything particularly wrong at the time. Because, of course, you feel that you have a hand in something that ended dreadfully. And, you know, it goes through my mind all the time that why did I just not question? Because on the night I questioned one of the companies. On the invoice, I saw a name that had been previously used on another Panorama program as one of the bank account names that I had to make up. And I questioned it with Martin, and he said, no, that'll do. It's fine, it's right. So I did question along the way. I spent all my time questioning, but, you know, out of diligence and loyalty, I just wanted him to meet his deadline because, as far as I was concerned, he'd never put a foot wrong.
Matt Wiesler, thank you very much indeed for joining us and for your openness this morning. We appreciate it. So was Diana duped into giving this Panorama interview? Joining us now is royal author Tom Bauer, who says that Diana would have done the interview anyway. And a close personal friend of Diana's, Rosa Monckton, who believes that Martin Bashir reeled the princess in with a web of lies. Well, Rosa Monckton, let's start with you. You wrote a very excoriating piece in today's Daily Mail, absolutely lacerating Martin Bashir and the BBC. I have to say, if the BBC applied its own judgment that it used to apply to tabloid newspapers to itself, they would demand heads roll and possibly jail time.
Absolutely. And I think that Bashir he behaved like the worst sort of paparazzi. He was ruthless, he was predatory, and he was calculating. And I think what people tend to forget, you know, people who say that she would have done an interview anyway, she did not approach Bashir. You know, he snared her in. And I think that's a very important point for people to remember.
And the sinister part of it is that Diana was pretty paranoid. I remember having lunch with her and Prince William at Kensington Palace one day, and she was, you know, airing a lot of theories about what people may or may not be doing to her, many of which were uncorroborated, but were clearly whirring in her mind. She had a high level of paranoia. A lot of it was, by the way, based on reality. But what Martin Bashir seems to have done is created a completely fictitious paper trail which was affirming her very worst fears.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, fair means or foul. He got her with this web of lies. He made up all these stories, you know, that William had a device on his watch, that her friends were selling stories about her, that her telephone was bugged. I mean, I got a letter from her in September, late September 95, saying I've had to change my number, strange things happening. And then the whole awful thing around Tiggy Leg Burke. He fed into her paranoia when she was in an extremely febrile state anyway. And of course, you know, she had been bugged before with the squidgy tapes. You know, her husband had been with the Camilla tapes. So her paranoia, if you want to call it that, was based on reality, based on the way her life was being... she was hounded the whole time.
Tom Bauer, Martin Bashir obviously not here to address all of these claims. And he's signed off at the moment by his doctors. He's currently recovering from heart surgery and the significant complications of COVID. The BBC says we'll investigate the issues raised. This will be independent. We'll set out the terms of reference in due course, do everything possible to get to the bottom of this. Unfortunately, unable to discuss any of this with Martin Bashir, seriously unwell. Investigations at the time focused on whether the Princess of Wales had been misled. The key was the Princess's own written assertion that she had not seen the mocked-up documents and they had played no part in her decision to take part. So actually, is this all a fuss about something that Princess Diana never knew about?
Well, I think there's about a lot more. Let me just say straight away, I'm not here to defend Martin Bashir or the BBC, of whom I'm extraordinarily critical. I think what we've got here is that Andrew Morton had been approached by Diana and written a sensational book already based on Diana's anger with the palace and with Charles. Diana was no stranger to the press. She constantly was briefing Fleet Street reporters and gossiping and delivering all sorts of anger that she felt towards the palace. So Bashir was actually approaching a woman who was very well experienced and very angry and keen to talk in one way or another. Now, his methods were appalling. The problem what we're now faced with is that Bashir's forgeries were known about already in 1996. What is extraordinary is it's taken 24 years to get to this stage, and that is partly because the BBC covered up their own sins, and it went right to the top. And that's what's so extraordinary about this whole story, that the BBC banned Visa, the graphic artist, and I myself am subject to a ban from the BBC too, because they find a very easy way when some people are saying things which they don't like or do things which embarrasses them, just to cut them out. And that applies to a lot of people in public and journalistic life in Britain. But the cover-up this time is so horrendous and so dramatic, and the weasel words, which are clearly based on other suggested forgeries, like this note from Diana, which has mysteriously disappeared, that one has got to wonder whether the BBC, under, I'm afraid to say, Tony Hall, became a really rotten can of worms. And it needs more than just an investigation into the Diana saga, which is horrendous in its own way, but altogether into its very boring and very biased news and current affairs service.
John Bowe, I just wonder with it, something that you mentioned earlier. I mean, Princess Diana was, it seems, ready to talk. So she perhaps would have done this interview with someone else, perhaps not Martin Bashir, but the chain of events might have been set off anyway with whoever she did the interview with.
My feeling is that journalism altogether, as Piers knows very well, you very often, when you approach people for interviews, and we've all done it dozens, hundreds of times, you touch a vulnerable point. They have an interest to talk, you spark the interest and provide the vehicle, the platform for them to express their views. There's nothing wrong with that. What is wrong here is that the forgeries were just clearly an instrumental part in luring her. Charles Spencer's role is unbelievable. He's been quiet for nearly 25 years. So why suddenly now does he come out with all this information? But worst of all is the BBC covered up and it went right to the top. How that happened, we must discover. But I do think that it is false to suggest that that interview led to the crash and her death in the tunnel in Paris 2 years later, for the simple reason this. If Charles Spencer, in the summer of 1997, had actually provided a home for Diana, which she wanted, during the summer holidays, which he denied her, she would not have gone to Paris.
Okay,
I know Fayed very well.
I mean, I think the chain of events...
Let's not make that link.
OK, but Tom, I think the chain of events... I'm bringing Rosa back in here, because you were with Diana a lot of the time in that last year of her life. I think the chain of events is she didn't have the Royal Protection officers with her, and that was all part of the severance from the royal family that was precipitated by the Bashir interview. So there is a chain there, isn't there?
I really do believe there is. I think because of the interview, everything moved very quickly. You know, the Queen said you've got to get a divorce. Things weren't considered properly, and I think with hindsight, her lawyers should have fought for her to retain her royal title. After all, she was the mother of the future king. With that title comes that cloak of protection. And I believe she would not have ended up being driven by, a drunk speeding in Paris if she had retained that title.